Hello, welcome back. In this video, we're going to continue working on our observed machine, taking it through the process of cleaning it up and getting it ready for animation and animating it to do some wacky and weird things as we go along. So, of course, depending on what you modeled, you don't have to model the exact same machine. These things will perhaps be different for you. But I am going to talk in generalizations about, good practices for cleaning up models for animation. First practice that, and I kind of skipped over it. I talked about naming materials, but I didn't really go into naming objects, and there's a reason I did that, is because certain operations that you can do that will combine and merge things together, which will obliterate names. But before you start animating, I do strongly recommend that we take a pass at organizing everything. And again, yours may be different than mine. Going through here and organizing things in some way. So let's start with that first. Generally, it's a good idea to merge things that cannot possibly move. I'm sorry, I should say combine, because merge actually is a different operation than combine. So we're going to talk about different kinds of ways of combining things or merging things or grouping things. There are actually all three of those things exist. There's just different ways of doing them. You do not actually have to merge, i.e. take this geometry and make sure it's sewn together. That is not necessary. It don't hurt anything if you do that, but that's generally not necessary, especially for things that are mechanical in nature. If you were rigging a character or something organic, that definitely is much more, you have to do that in some cases, depending on what it is. You generally can get away with just combining them, which what it'll do is it'll take the geometry, and what Maya will do is it'll see it as a single object, even if they're technically not sewn together. That's a combine operation, and that's generally acceptable for many things actually in animation. And it's fine. You can grab these objects, stick them in the other one. They don't actually have to be sewn together, merged together, and just combine them. Um, Not because there's anything wrong with it, but I'm going to go ahead and grab all the pieces that I think that are going to be combined. And this is reversible, so if you make a mistake, and I'll show you how, this is reversible, so it's not the end of the world. But I'm going to go ahead and grab everything that I think that's not going to be animated. And that's really, your judgment call. What do you want to not be, do that? So I think all my parts here, right here, this part, this part, this part, and I'm just holding down Shift as I select these things. This part, I'm going to definitely animate this needle, so I don't want to grab that. This part right here, but I'm going to maneuver probably this piece down here. So I don't think I'm going to mess with the tubes. I don't think I'm going to mess with this because I might move this. And again, if you change your mind, this can be backed up and undone. All right. So I think in my first guess, I think all these things are going to be combined. None of these things are going to move. And so with all these things selected, I can go up to Mesh, Combine. And what you'll do is you'll see in the outliner, all these objects will get merged into one, and it'll create what's called null objects, these little arrows and things in the scene. These are a little annoying, but it creates them for various reasons under the hood. But most of the time you don't need them. Just to be blunt, you don't need them most of the time. So if I combined them, you can see now this is all one object. These pieces I combine are all one object, and we got all these null objects. Now, if you do a combine operation, I strongly recommend that you immediately follow it up with a edit, delete by type, history, which will get rid of these null objects, because again, you probably won't need them. So edit, delete by type, history, and you can see it gets rid of most of them. There's one still here for some reason. Perhaps I missed something when selected. If you see this in your outliner, a null object, I'm just going to go ahead and say you should be, make sure you take a look at everything and then make sure your scene's saved, but you should be able to delete these. And if you see nothing change, you should be fine. Because like I said, maybe I missed something along the route, but those are null objects, and I know it's safe because there's no little plus here. It's not attached to anything. This is empty. So I'm just going to select that and delete that. So I have this P cube 12, which is made up of all these pieces. This is, I would rename. I would come in here and I would double click on it here, call it absurd machine, maybe underscore base or something, for like the base part of the machine or something like that. Now, if for some reason you need to break it back apart, and make a couple objects here just to test to show you, because I don't want to do it to my machine. Just duplicate this, rotate this. So here's my two objects I'm going to do. So if for some reason I combine two things, and I'm just going to combine these two things, mesh combine, and then I'm going to go delete my history, just just follow suit of what we did last time. You can see it even has a quick key, Alt-Shift-D. All right, so I mean, let's say for some reason I need to get something out of here. I can come back and do mesh separate to separate these things back. And what it does is by default, it puts them in a group. We'll talk about groups in a little bit, but just now I know you have these objects separated again. And if you need to move them out of the group, again, when I show you grouping stuff later, you can follow that. But like I said, these are now separated again. You can do them generally. At least when I've had to break a combine, it's usually because I want to tweak something or delete a piece out of it, and then I recombine something back in or something along those lines. But if you need to take it out of a group, you can maneuver things in here. Generally, the easiest way is to middle mouse click and hold in the outliner and drag it. I can't unfortunately zoom in right now. I don't have it set up, but you can drag the object. And if you see an encapsulated line, you're dragging it into something. In this case, we don't want that. You do have a single little dotted line that you're dragging it in between those objects. And my mouse is so sensitive. You can see I dragged it between those objects. Undo. In this case, I don't want any of these things, so I'm just going to delete them. If I see my machine here, you can see I have the base. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that, because again, none of these things can be animated, I have that as a combined element. I probably could have done this room as well, but I just didn't want to include it. I'm just going to leave this as its own thing. Call it section maybe. I have no idea. And again, I'm just renaming it. I'm just going to leave this as its own object. Other things you can do, for example, I don't want to see this light here. I can hide this, Control H, and hide that. Actually, let's not hide that. Let's move this out of the way, because again, this is a directional light. We can just move this. We can also, if you want to keep the lights but not hide them, you can also turn off the lights under here, under show lights. Right there, there it is. Show lights, and then it will hide the nomens, but not actually hide the rendering attributes. The problem is a lot of people forget about this, and then they can't find them again. So if it does really bother you, you can turn it off so you don't even look at them, but they still work. So I'll go ahead and, why not? I'll go ahead and turn them off. But again, just be careful. There's the ways to turn things off here, as well as hide them in here. The difference is, I'll go ahead and hide this wall here temporarily. If I hit Control H on this, you can see, because it's dark gray in here, it's hidden. To bring it back, you select it, and Shift H brings it back. These also can be found through the slow menus, but that's found under Display, Hide Selection, and Show Selection. So, again, I'm just a huge fan of my quick keys. Okay, so we have these objects, and I'm intending to, I said this I'm not going to animate. So I'm at least intending to potentially animate the rest of this stuff. So what you can do, and sometimes this is not required, but what you can perhaps save some things. Like, for example, I generally recommend, if you can, you freeze things. Like, for example, this particular thing, and I talked about it briefly in the last video, this particular thing here doesn't really benefit from me. I don't need to worry about this right here. Like, it doesn't have a rotation, it has a 90-degree rotation, but I could freeze this, and this is still orthogonally aligned. If you had any sort of angle to it, you can't freeze this. Well, you shouldn't freeze this. So it'd be a bad idea to freeze this. But if it's orthogonally aligned, i.e. it runs with your grid, you can freeze it. And what we talked about last video is this one. This is not orthogonally aligned. So I need to keep this value. I can't freeze this because I'll need that later. So again, just to kind of talk about it from the other side, is if it's orthogonally aligned, you most likely should be able to freeze this without causing a problem. And it probably will make things easier. So if I just grab these real quickly and go freeze transformations, there you go. I could probably freeze this, which I'm going to do. Modify freeze transformations. Modify freeze transformations. All right, there we go. So I'm going through in here and I'm freezing all these things that I don't want to, I know that I want to animate. It's just, it'll make it cleaner and easier as we go forward. The other thing that you might want to consider doing, this is not necessarily required, but I think it'll make this a lot easier, is I'm going to go ahead and group all the machine together. So I combined the parts that aren't going to be animated, so it's one piece. But I'm going to go through and select all these things, but except for the walls here. I'm going to group these. What this is going to do is going to put it in a group. Now, a group is different from a combine. What a group is, it's essentially the same way if you took folders from your computer and you put them in files in a folder, and you move the folder around. It's the same idea. So if I grab all these objects, I'm not including the wall or the lights, and I'm going to go. It's quick keys Control G, but okay, it's under Edit, Control G. You can see it makes a group. Now the thing about groups is it automatically puts the pivot point, granted this is an option you can change. You see if I maximize this, it puts the group at the origin, which most of the time is not what you want, but I'll talk about that later. But you can see this group has all these pieces in it now, and it's like a little thing that I can grab now and move it around. So I have my machine as a group, but I can still select individual pieces. So this is great for if you don't want to combine them, but you want them to be somehow together. So that way what this will do is it'll allow you to scale up or down or rotate the entire machine or do something. You can do that, and this has applications in both for modeling as well as animation. The big one, the one I often see students try to do is they will select everything and they'll start scaling it, and then the object will tear itself apart. And again, the reason that is because each object has its own pivot point, which is wherever the gnomon is. Each object has its own pivot point, and everything scales from its own pivot point. So if you give it a group, it gives it a common unified pivot point that you can scale from. In this case, again, it's at the origin, which is weird, but you can see it scales and doesn't tear itself apart. Now, if you want that pivot point to be somewhere else, there's two things you can do. You can either manually move it by tapping the D key and grabbing the arrows and move it wherever you want, or you can, I tapped the D key to exit that, by the way. So D to enter, D to exit. The other way, that's quicker and generally most of the time what I use is under called Modify, Center Pivot. And all this does is it approximates the center of all the objects that are currently selected and puts the pivot point at the center of them. So it's kind of a quick fix center. And most of the time this is what you want, so you can modify it from the center. But you can technically place it anywhere you want. And there are cases where you will want the pivot point in other places, which we will have some of those even in this lecture. So for example, I should really go through and rename these all, but this needle here, go ahead and name this now. Double click on this needle. This is a good example right here. The needle, its pivot point is at the center. And I'm planning on rotating this. And technically it probably will work. You can kind of see it kind of working, but that's not what I want. I don't want it to rotate from there. We talk about like animating from a door or from hinges. This is not the hinge of this needle. The hinge of this needle is down lower. So if I hit the D key, Delta key, and into pivot point mode and drag the pivot point down some, and it doesn't even have to be on the object, it can be anywhere. So I drag it down here and hit the D key again to exit, and now rotate this. You can see it's going to rotate from this spot. So you will probably have to go through in several objects and manipulate the pivot points where you want. Most of the time it will be at the center. Like these gears, it's going to be the center. These dials, it doesn't really matter. It's going to probably be the center of the dials, or whatever we call these little slider things. These exhaust pipes, in my case, I want the pivot point to be at the bottom, and I've already moved these ones because I tend to animate these almost very cartoony, going up and down, up and down, up and down, like an engine or pistons or something. So these will be animated up and down. So I took these and moved the pivot point to the bottom. Again, maybe this thing, you might come in here and you say, I'm going to scale this up and down. Then you would want the pivot point to be where you want it to scale from. This would work because pieces are hidden, but you might want to kind of play with exploring these beforehand. And this is why we froze the transformations, because if I do this while I'm playing, I can always go back to 1 and get it back to the way I intended it to be before animating. So freezing transformations, deleting history when I talked about them earlier, they're good preludes before you start animating. That way you can get back. And again, since maybe you guys are newer at this, I'd recommend maybe saving beforehand just in case and it's going to happen on one of your projects. You're going to make mistakes. It's part of the process. You're going to learn from those mistakes. But yeah, save a copy, and then like I said, we freeze transformations and delete history and things generally before we start animating. But anyway, back to this point here, is maybe I should move pivot point up here. Again, D key, move the pivot point up, D key to exit that, and grab the scale. And I haven't really talked about animation yet, but I'm sitting here moving these things like, oh, that's going to animate. And that's exactly how actually animation works. We're going to eventually come in here and just adjust these values, and that's another reason why we reset them to 1. Adjust these values to 1s and 0s and things like that because it's just easier math. And again, you're probably like, oh my God, I want to be an animator, not a mathematician. But honestly, computers, it's math, but it's all simple math, and you can do very WYSIWYG, what you see, what you get type of math, and you refer to the numbers when there's issues or when you need confirmation of things are working the way you need them to. So yeah, so you can see, here we go. I'm going to probably do a deformer on this. I have a feeling I'm missing some things for my deformers. I might have to make a few additional things for this later to fulfill all the things I want to cover, but I think I'm really ready to go here. All right, so you got this. I'm going to go ahead and save this. Make sure you always save a copy of your object before you start animating. I'm going to rename this one. Double click on this. I'm just going to call this base because I'm going to rename my group to be Absurd Machine. So I'm going to go through here and rename these and talk a little bit as I go through more. I'm going to call this Top Tube. Gear 1 is fine. Gear 01. I'm going to copy the name. Double click, paste this. Paste this. Just renaming these as I go. And again, this is a good practice. Bottom tube. P cylinder. This is the nozzle or something. It tends to be the nozzle. Got smokestack or stack. I'm just gonna call it stack 01. This one stack 02. And again, of course, you're gonna have different names or different objects, hopefully. Slider 01. You can name these whatever you like. Again, it's not important that you name these the same way I do. That is absolutely not necessary. It's just I do recommend you name your things. Okay, so I've named all this stuff, and again, I have a group. As mentioned earlier, if you want to take something out of a group, you can middle mouse drag it out. You can also remove it by selecting the object and going ungroup. Unfortunately, that only works on pulling the entire thing apart. So if you wanted everything, you can select all of this in ungroup. I don't want to do that in this case, but it will destroy this one object here. Most time I see people wanting to pull one thing out, and that's middle mouse dragging the object out. Okay, so we have this relatively cleaned up. This is a harder step. It's not absolutely necessary, but it makes your life way easier when your model is clean and to be animated. You can see one thing I did kind of gloss over. This one still has a transformation. I know as I'm clicking through this, I noticed this. And again, I don't want to freeze this because I want this -10. But technically, there's a trick to this. We can freeze individual channels. If you want to be extra clean, the way you would do this is if you select these channels in question, because I want the -10 here. I don't want these translates. I can actually right-click on these. And again, all I did was like left-click and held, selected those channels, right-click and held, then freeze, translate. Actually, I might not even have to have them selected. Let's test it. I'm going to just grab 1, 2. Freeze, translate. Oh, see, you didn't even have to have them selected. So looks like just right-click on any one of these. You can just do the property that you want. Again, translate is the move. In this case, if you were to try to move these directionally, that would be a problem, but I plan to scale these. So sometimes, and then my example here, I can freeze the translate. These ones I can freeze too. It doesn't really matter. Like I said, I just froze them because I can go up and down on relation of where they started. All right. So this is ready to be animated. Now, animation. Now, animation in Maya is done with the principles of animation, and generally it follows the same ideas as traditional animation. However, for computers, it's a lot of value over time. Really, when computer does animation, it's value over time. And just like traditional animation, it uses the concept of keyframes and in between frames, or tweening. Sometimes it might be called tweening frames. So what happens is you take on the role as the lead animator, and you can add keyframes to things, which are the key moments that this particular object where it must be. It must be at this translate, this rotate, this scale on this frame. And then when you have two of them, what the computer is going to do is it's going to say, okay, on this frame it's this, and on this frame it's that, and it's just going to divide. Now, there's a lot of course, where you can go in there and adjust how it divides and how it does those things, but essentially that's what's happening. It's dividing the value of those two particular keyframes over time. Now, the concept of frames, if you're not familiar with that, is a point in time. But generally, your frame is not a second. So a lot of students get confused by that. Frames are not seconds. Frames are how many images it takes to make a second. And this really depends on what's called your frame rate is. And it's different for film, television, animations in different countries. It's become more and more standardized lately, but really it depends on what you want it to be at. Now, legacy and history had the frame rate of film at 24 frames per second. That's typically what it is. But again, it's not required. Television's usually at 30 frames per second, and there's a whole history in that, but it's not important for the particular lecture here. But your frame rate is really, again, up to you. You just need to know what it is. You can see your frame rate in the bottom right. Now, the default frame rate on Maya is 24 frames per second. Some other programs it's 30. Like I said, it's just different. It depends on what you want to do your math in. You want to do your math in values of 24 or 30 or something else? You can. I recommend 24 or 30 personally, but you can change it if you want, or you can leave it at 24 if you like as well. I'm going to leave this alone just for simplicity, so that we're not the setting that we don't have to change. But again, if you want to change this to 30 frames per second, you can just click on this and change it by 30 to 30 frames per second. Again, not important right now, in my opinion, but not really that important. Just you need to know what your frame rate is. And again, we'll probably in future projects we will change it, just to mix it up a bit. Why not? All right. So that means that down here in the time slider, this right here is all your frames. And I'm pretty sure this is the default settings right here. I'm currently looking at frames 1 to 120. And you can see this in this little bar right here. This is the range slider. This shows you what you're previewing. So this shows you your start frame, however the animation is starting, the start of the range slider, the end of the range slider, the end of the animation, and whatever arbitrary number they chose, 200 frames is the end of the animation. If you wanted to make a 10-second animation in this example, because our frame rate is 24 frames per second, we would want the end of this animation to be 240 frames. So again, I might have to increase or decrease this. It can be changed later. But let's just say we want to make this 10 seconds. So I'm going to change this last number here to 240 and just hit enter. And you'll see the range slider change a little bit, but nothing else really changed. What the range slider is, it shows you your frames that you're currently looking at. And again, you can I generally just drag these little boxes around, but you can also numerically type the numbers in these internet set of numbers here. This is the ranges. But again, if you come here and click and hold on these boxes, you can actually drag them. This is typically how I do it. And what you can do is if you fill the whole range slider to fill the entire bar, you're basically looking at all the frames in your animation. Typically, again, from my experience, this is how most animators start. they tend to look at the macro, the i.e. far out view, and then as they start getting more and more refined, they start reducing this range slider to viewing fewer and fewer frames and kind of dragging this around and seeing just sections of their ranges, so that way they can really focus on those key frames of whatever they're currently looking at. So again, whatever time that you picked for this thing, like I said, I'm going to start at 10. I might make it longer, I might make it shorter. Great thing is it's all can be easily changed. And I'm going to go ahead and drag the range slider all the way out. So I'm looking at all 10 seconds down here. And again, this is the time slider, and you can what's called scrub through this by left clicking and holding. There's no animation yet, so it doesn't do anything, but I can right click and scrub this time, and you can see my example, I'm on frame 53. I'm on frame 143. I'm back at 1. So you can left click and hold and scrub that timeline. You also have what we call the VCR controls. This is go to the end of the animation, go back 1 frame, go back 1 keyframe, play backwards, play forwards, go to the next keyframe, go forward 1 frame, go to the end of the animation. So you can see right there. Obviously, these 2 keyframe ones won't work because I don't have any keyframes yet, and play ain't gonna do anything because there's nothing to really see. So if I hit play, nothing happens because there's no animation yet. So those are the VCR controls. And then again, we can also just manually click and hold to move the time as well. You can also come in here and type the current time right here. I don't use this one as much, but yes, you can also type the time right there. So if you want to go exactly to frame 120, you can just type the time right there. So this is all your animation controls down here. And again, what's going to do is when you start adding keyframes, it's going to mark the object with a red line down here, and that is a keyframe. And it doesn't do the in-betweens, it just marks just the keyframes down here. So for example, let's start with something simple. In at least my case, my example, these gears are very simple to animate, very simple. And I'm going to shoot for a looping animation, which means this animation will play from beginning to end with no glitches. And now I'll talk about, like I said, if you don't get that result, that's fine. But like I said, that's what I'm going to shoot for. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to animate these rotating, because as I said, we played with this, we rotated this. So on 1 frame at the beginning, technically I can just leave this at 0. And at another frame, I'm going to have this be rotated, in my case, the rotate X. That's why I'm playing with this. Again, I'm just grabbing the E key, going in here, rotating this and trying to rotate it, because I want to see which way I want to rotate it. So on frame 1, we don't need to technically do anything to the object because we've already set it. When you're originally modeling it, we've already set it. And you kind of need to pay attention to how you do these in order, because I've already talked about it's already set. So there's 3 real rules that you need to follow when you're animating or trying to set keyframes, particularly in animating. One is you always must adjust the timeline first. In this case, we have no keyframe, so it doesn't matter yet, but you need to adjust the timeline. Guess if you have to, which is generally what you're doing. And again, because there's nothing set, we're on frame 1, so the time technically is already set. We've already set the time. Second step is you always adjust the object. Once again, because we haven't done anything yet, the object is modeled and ready to go. This is already set for us. Saving, just be safe. And the last thing is you finally set a key. Now, if you don't do those 3 steps in that order, one of 2 things is going to happen. Either you're going to accidentally overwrite a keyframe because you didn't move the time, or 2, you're like, oh, I forgot to move the time, and then you're going to go move it, and the object will jump back because it's already animated. So just be in the habit of remembering to move the timeline first, even if it's a guess, because you can change it later, adjust the object, set a key. So again, the first 2 steps are already done for us because it's the very beginning of the project. We've already set the timeline at 1. We've already adjusted the objects. We've done it. Now it's time to set a key. I don't like setting keys like this, but let's go ahead and do it the messy way. Select an object. To set a key on an object selected, you hit the S key on your keyboard. What you will do is you'll see in the channel box, you'll see all these turn like a red little box appear. And you'll also see a red line down here. So we have set a key on this particular keyframe. To keep this simple, because I don't plan on doing anything, maybe if I wanted the gears to like jar up, I would have more keyframes, but I'm just going to do a simple rotation. I'm going to go ahead and go to the very end of the animation, either click and drag, or if you want to, you can use this little double arrow pointing to the right, and I'm going to rotate this. And I'm going to go ahead and rotate like this, and I'm kind of looking, I'm like, okay, it's going to be there. I'm going to go ahead and, once I know which one it is, I'm going to go ahead and type in here negative 360, because again, this is 300. It's in values at 360 degrees, which is a full circle. If I want to do a full loop, I'm going to make this negative 360 because that's the direction I want to go. I'm going to hit enter. All right, and then I do advise. It's a little catches a lot of students off guard, but you have to. Sometimes I just recommend clicking on this again to get out of that little light blue where it still wants to input, because you'll start typing in letters here when you start to try to keyframe things. And then once again, I can hit the S key. Now, you might have noticed I haven't hit it yet. This is more of a pink color. This just shows something that's animated, but you're not currently on an animation. If it's solid red, that means you're on a keyframe. So again, I haven't hit S yet. It's just showing that. So now I'm going to hit S, and you'll see it turn solid red. And you look down here, there are one keyframe at the beginning, one keyframe at the end, and all these things are red. This now has two keyframes with some time in between them. Again, value over time. So what will happen is the computer will go from 0, negative 360 on the X, from 0 on the rotate X to negative 360 on the rotate X. And it's going to divide it over whatever time is here. And it's going to do some other things that are technically wrong, but we'll come back to that later. So I'm going to go ahead and rewind this, or just scrub back to the beginning, and hit play. And over the 10 seconds, we will see this gear spin. So what's happening here is it's dividing that time, and you can see it's doing it. Now the problem is it's going to a slow start and a slow end. It's doing what's called an ease in, ease out. The reason is this is the default because character animation is the most dominant thing you do in Maya, and that tends to benefit from ease in, ease out. So since this is mechanical, this is technically probably not what we want, but for right now, I'm going to leave this alone. I'll show you how to clean this up a little bit later, just because I don't want to dive into what's called the graph editor just right now. Now, the other thing I personally do not like about this, and I'm going to talk about this now, I'll leave this one alone, is I don't personally like the S key, which is what I hit to animate these. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's definitely faster. It's not as fast as auto key, which I skipped over completely. I don't like to even talk about that at all until you have more experience. But the S key keys all your frames. Now, again, maybe it's my industry background, and like I said, I do mostly video game development, and you want as few keyframes as possible. But even from like a film perspective, the more keyframes you are, the more messy it is. It means the more likely you're going to have to clean up down the road, and you're going to have to wipe out all these attributes. So here's how I like to do keys, and I'm just going to make an example object here real quick to show this. I'll make a cube. Now, if you key this, again, I'm just going to move this to 1. If I wanted this to go from here to over here, I could, of course, again, hit the S key, drag this. I'm not going to go all the way, and bring this over here and hit the S key again. And again, you saw me do it really fast there. But again, I always adjust the object, adjust the timeline, frame 1, adjusted the object, put it over here, S key to set a frame. I guessed my time, just dragged it, altered the object, hit an S key. Again, don't forget those 3 steps. Always time first, then adjust the object, then key. So you can see, again, the S key is quick, really quick. Now, the reason I don't like it is because it limits your ability to do advanced animation down the road. We will not be talking about that at all in this lecture, but just know that it does limit your ability, without having to clean it up, it does limit your ability to do advanced tips and tricks that I will show you later on future projects. So this is what I like to do. I like to limit whatever the animation is to the property that it needs to be animated. In this case of the gear, I only need to rotate X. Now, there are numerous ways of doing this. One, You can limit the animation to whatever you want to do by using Shift and the corresponding tool. So if I only want to translate this cube, for example, I can do Shift W instead of S. So move the time, Shift W, move the object or timeline. Now move the object and hit Shift W again. You'll see it will only key those three things. Now the reason why this is good is, let's say I come back in here, you know what, I want to scale this down. And I can do that, and it won't animate those values because there's no keyframe there, and it won't break your translate animation. Or if I want to rotate this slightly, it will not break your translate animation because there's no keyframes there. For the example, if I do it on this one, if I want to mess with this and scale this up, I cannot do that because it will always snap back because there's values on everything. So when you limit your animation to only the things that you need to animate, it opens a door for animation down the road, especially what's called hierarchical animation, where you can use other things to control other things. Again, advanced concept. You know, I'm not going to get into that right now, but again, I recommend that you take notice, at least now. Try to limit your animations because, again, it'll make your life simpler and cleaner when you start looking at graphs. So in our example here, on this one, this would have been, I'll just do this on this one. I'm gonna check, see which way I want to rotate it first. I'm gonna go positive with this one. I wanted the E key, which is what rotate is. I would do Shift E. So frame 1, Shift E, and then what I would do is move my time, go all the way in, and I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna do 2 rotations. So you can see, all right, I'm gonna do 720. And then I'm going to click back on this over here and Shift E again. And what you'll see is it still rotates. Again, I did Shift and the corresponding tool. And this with only rotations. So you can see it's animating in the opposite direction. Because that's just my choice in this case. So you can see it's animating in the opposite direction. Now if you want to be really clean, and I'll do it on this last gear here, what we could do is we can come in again. Oh, it's because that's the same one. Rotate X. We can actually right click and just go key selected. And then move the timeline to the very end. And then I'm going to go ahead and do -720. And then I'm going to go right click, key selected. That's perhaps the slowest, but it is the cleanest. Again, you can get away with, in this assignment, you're not going to get like marked down or anything like that, or just it will work, the S key. But if you're feeling comfortable with this, I would strongly encourage you to start moving towards Shift and the corresponding tools, i.e. W, E, or R, or right-clicking and doing key selected, because that will, in the long run, that will benefit you more. But all three of those ways will work. And there's even more, which we haven't talked about. So again, because I already had the object set up, you can see that the first frame for all these, unless you want it to be something different, is going to be rotate 0. And then at the very end, it's going to be some value of 360, assuming you want it to be a complete loop. If you don't want it to be a complete loop, that's absolutely fine. I'll make it some other value, other than 360. That's perfectly fine. But you can see there's my rotation animation as I'm playing, scrubbing around, previewing, looking at it, and it's doing its crazy gear turning thing. Now, if you wanted to come in here and start having them like glitch and do things, that's perfectly fine. It would just require you to do more keyframes to have them, be kind of go. And it would be kind of interesting to do like stop and go, stop and go, and stop and go. But honestly, I don't know if you want to try that for your first animation. If this is your first animation, if you have some animation experience, maybe do some frames where you rotate, stop, stop, rotate, stop, rotate, stop. And it would just require you to have multiple keyframes to do that. All right, so there's the rotation. And in fact, we'll probably have a few more rotation. This is rotation as well. And again, I move the pivot point down here. This is the same thing. If I want the pivot point, maybe I want it to start over here. I'm going to go ahead and move this a little bit before I start animating. I just left it in the center. I'm gonna start at 20. So I moved the timeline, altered the object, and I'll do shift. Well, I'm just gonna right click and go key selected because I like that method. And then I'm like, okay, that's good. And then maybe this is one I'll play with a little bit. Maybe I'll come over here to see, I don't know, 60. I'm just guessing. Again, guessing. I'm gonna come over here, and you don't have to have precise numbers. Key selected. And I'm just gonna move the time a little bit more. Alter the object. Again, move the, again, always alter the timeline, then alter the object, then set the key. Move the timeline, alter the object, set a key. Now, if your intention is to have a looping animation, you can look at your first value, which again, I made it even on purpose so it's easy to copy, or you can literally just copy. Now, we didn't talk about this in the gear, so this is new. To copy a particular keyframe here, it's a little tricky, only because you have to be sure that you're on it. That's the only part that's tricky. Now, as you see, I drag this little gray box here. To the right of whatever that line is, that is selected. People sometimes get confused and they're like, I want to be right on that line. I can't get it. But to the right of it, just slightly to the right of it is, and you'll see the number too. It says 1 in this case. To the right of it is what's selected. So that throws a few people off. But when you're to the right of it, right here, selected, right click, copy. Go to the very end, right click, paste, paste. There's 2 pastes. Got a double paste. Don't forget to double paste. And now if I rewind this and play, it will have its values. And again, every keyframe I am locking where it wanted to be. So again, as you saw it, I was just randomly picking different times and rotating it back and forth. And you can see that it's doing that. Again, it's easing in, easing out. There is more ways we can adjust this as we get into more advanced animation. But for right now, this is perfectly fine. We can totally do this and kind of have this going. So we got this kind of going. Okay. So you can see there's all the rotations. Stop. We can do the exact same thing for the translates on these objects. So again, I'm going to move these up and down. I don't think I'm going to start all at the center. I'm going to go ahead and adjust these. Oops, make sure you get the right ones. You know what? I'm going to do these all at the same time to save time. Well, not exactly at the same time, but I'm going to select all 3 of these. And yes, you can have multiple objects selected when you do your keyframes. Key selected. And I'm going to go ahead and, I don't know, do 60 again. It's a nice number. Drag this up, drag this down, put this one up. And again, I'm just totally guessing. Select all 3 of these. And again, if you want to be quicker, Shift W in this particular case. If you want to be more precise, right-clicking on whatever attribute it is and doing it. And again, the larger distance this moves, and again, I'm kind of doing this very loose, but the larger it moves, the faster it moves. And that's all animation really is. If we give these large movements under less time, that'll be faster. If I want it to be move slower, then you would want it to either be a larger distance over less, larger time over a less distance, or like I said, if you want it to be fast, it'd be either massive amounts of distance change or less time. And again, I'm taking it very simplistic here. I'm just kind of eyeballing, keeping these numbers nice and even. And once again, I'm just going to copy and paste this first frame over here. So I'm going to go for looping animation, and I'm going to paste it at the very end. So again, right click and hold for copy, right click and hold for paste. If I look at these, I'm going to rewind this and play. Now, I haven't really made any grievous mistakes here that I'm like, oh my god, I hate it. But if you don't like something, of course you can delete it. And you kind of saw there how, as I was copying and pasting, that's one way of deleting. So let's say you don't want some of these keys in here. Maybe for this one, and this might look bad, we'll see. Maybe on this one, I just don't even want this frame anymore. I'm just going to go ahead and right click on this and delete this keyframe. So if I delete that keyframe goes away. and it will fill in the whatever, because it still has more keyframes here. In this case, it's going to just compute the difference in those keyframes. Now I'm just going to take a look to see what this looks like, because I honestly don't know. So I'm kind of going up and down, up and down. It's kind of doing its thing. It's going a little slower, then it's going to go back up, and then it's going to go down. And I mean, it looks fine. It's not, it's not going to win any awards or anything, but it's a great start. Now, if you absolutely hate everything about it, you want to start from scratch, and don't be afraid to do this. If something looks awful and you can't figure it out, what is wrong with it, you can delete an entire animation off an object. And how you would do that, it's called breaking the connections. So in the translate, or whatever property it is that you want to get rid of, we can right click on it or select the properties that you want to do this, because you can do this specifically too. And you can right click and go break connections, and this will get rid of all the animations on the channels that you currently have selected. I'm not going to do this, but this would get rid of them all. So if you ever make a mistake, I strongly recommend that if you're having a hard time, I would recommend that you break the connections and then try again. Like, as you can see, these animations aren't meant to be the most complex. Don't spend a lot of time, trying to make something super complex, and then spend, an hour trying to fix something because it has one minor hiccup. It's oftentimes easier to honestly just scrap it and try again, without having, without having to, track down why it's doing that. Because like I said, most time, the more keyframes you start adding to correct something, the more likely it can be done simpler. So I strongly recommend that you scrap those frames by going break connections. All right, so there's my rotates, my translates, and I'm gonna go ahead and do scale here. So I'm just gonna animate the scale. Now what I want to do is I want to have these alternate. I'm gonna go very cartoony with this. Maybe, and I'm gonna be very like precise, I think, with this one. Is I'm gonna go ahead and have this go from 1 to 0.7, and have them basically toggle back and forth between each other. So what I'm going to do is I'm just gonna go ahead and keyframe the scale, in this case Y, because I positioned my thing. And I'm gonna go ahead and select these both, go key selected, and then you know what, we'll have a little bit of fun with this. Maybe what I'll do is I will go ahead and I'm planning ahead, and this is from experience. I'm gonna have them do this, I don't know, let's say every 2 seconds. It might be too fast. So if that's frame 48, and I'm going to go ahead and key it again. So what I'm doing is I'm going to have this do it every 2 seconds. So at frame 48, again, if you're doing 30 frames per second, this would be 60. But every 2 seconds, I'm going to key this, and it would be a loop. It's a good idea to think in loops if you're doing that kind of animation. In this case, it's not absolutely crucial, but I want to do that. So at frame 24, halfway, I'll go ahead and make this one 0.7 and this one 1. And I'll make sure I select them both and key selected. And let's see what that looks like. Now, I really want to get in here and do squash and stretch and really go beyond, but that might be a little bit too much for our first assignment here, but you can see, boom, 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 it did it and it stopped. Now, there is actually lots of ways, and I really want to go into it. I'm too excited. I really want to go in and show you these other ways, but frankly, let's talk about copying and pasting multiple keyframes, since it's relevant to what we're talking about now. So I did this 2 seconds. I'm gonna copy and paste these keyframes as I go. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come down here. It doesn't matter which side you start on. I'm gonna go ahead and hold down Shift, and I'm gonna drag, and you get this red box. It's a very scary looking red box. This allows you to select multiple keyframes. Now what you see here right now, these little arrows down here, this allows you to move and scale them. That's not what I intend to do here, but you could, if you had to, move multiple keyframes by clicking and holding on this and dragging them, or scale them by dragging them. I don't plan on doing that. I plan on right-clicking and copying these. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to frame 48, and I'm going to go ahead and right-click and paste. And then I'm going to follow this along. And what you can, again, now this is useful. You can use the little next keyframe functions right here on the right. Go to the next one and paste again. Paste, paste. Click on next keyframe, paste, paste. Next keyframe, and paste, paste. And there you go. You can see it's going. I'm slightly off with my math here. I'm going to move this last keyframe. I'm just going to go ahead to move this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just double check and see where I made my mistake. That should be 72. That should be 96. It looks like, okay, I see where I made my mistake, but that's okay. I'm just going to go ahead. It's not that big of a deal. I'm going to go ahead and cut this one, which will remove this keyframe. Go to the last frame and paste. And now we can actually, maybe even if we wanted to, nudge these around. Again, remember how I talked about red thing? Grab this keyframe. I didn't intend to do this, but hey, why not? Grab a few of these, maybe move that. It's only a fraction of a frame, so it's not going to be that noticeable. But yeah, we can take a look. You know, boom, 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 boom. Our machine is going. It's doing its thing. You can see it's going. All right. So there's my overall simplistic transforms. There's a lot more we could do with this, of course, but I'm just trying to keep this simplistic. Yes, again, we have ease in, ease out. That's probably not what we want, but it's fine. For this particular one, we'll talk about graph editors and stuff down the line, but I'm just kind of animating these things as I go. Okay. The last couple things that we have to mess with is a couple deformers. Now, I do want you guys to use some deformers. You probably, unfortunately, if you've did the way I did it, you're probably going to have to think about something else to add to deformers. I haven't talked about deformers yet, other than the bin. We talked about the bin briefly. I haven't talked about how to animate it, but that's really easy. We haven't talked about the other deformers, so you haven't seen what they can do. So maybe you might have to make something. And again, I apologize for that, but a lot of this kind of stuff is 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward kind of thing. So let me go ahead and stop this, and let's go ahead and just do a quick preview of a quick overview of the other deformers. Again, I've already covered bin, so I'm not going to do it again. At least not showing you what it does. I did that in the previous lectures. But let's go ahead and make some objects here. And again, bin deformers in general need divisions. So if I create this division and have some divisions along the input here, along the height, I'm just going to do 30. Deformers generally need subdivisions to properly work or work well. So if I come in here and go deform, nonlinear, we already did bin. I can do flare. This one's very easy, thankfully. Flare has a start and end, and I'm going to go through these really quickly. But again, what you can do is, I recommend that you do at least, is you just kind of make a scene, or in your current scene, just make an object off to the side and play with them and try different things. But if the start flare is probably the top in this case, it's going to be one side, the end flare is going to be the other side, and we can come in here and taper this object in those things. So again, remember, click on the word, middle mouse click in here. Again, if you don't want to, you can also just type numerically in there. But this is flare. And again, this is just me. The start was on the bottom. In my case, I was wrong. If I do 0.5 and 0.5, we can make these perfectly even. You can see it's tapered a little bit. The end flare is the other side. Whatever one side is, the end flare is the opposite side. Curvature adds a little bit of a curve, like a bulging curve into it. So you can see something like that. And again, once again, the low bound and high bound in this case is the bottom and the top of the object. So if you only want it to affect part of it, you can remember reduce. If you want to reduce the effect, move these numbers closer to 0. It'll only affect half of it. Or if you want, you can expand it as well. And last, I skipped over it, but again, envelope this is more practical, but you can see how I've messed with a bunch of attributes. Envelope is if you want a global turn on and off of your entire flare. So this is great to animate if you want to do this kind of thing. So if you want to animate this on and off like this, you can do that. So maybe you have some animation doing this. And again, this is an absurd machine. If you want to stick a tube on there that's doing this, and like, what the heck is that thing doing? this is a great exploration to explore these kinds of animations. One reason when we threw them into this particular exercise is because the transform animations that I already did, those are great. They're your core animations. But if you really want to get the bizarre stuff on your absurd machine, it's going to probably come from your deformers. All right, so you can do that. Don't forget that you can animate literally this deformer itself. So again, I hit the 4 key to get the deformer. If you remember, the bend deformer had a line that you can grab. Same thing with all the other deformers that we will talk about here. But you can literally grab, move, scale, rotate this deformer for various results. So if I move this, if you want to do the something going through the pipe trick, whoop, whoop, and you can kind of guess where this is going. I'm probably going to, this is exactly what I planned on using for mine, is I'm going to animate this going down and put this right here. That was my plan. We'll see if that works. And you can see, and it goes through, and that's what I plan on doing for mine. So that's flare, and it's, you know, very useful. And again, you can either animate the values by just adding, because these can be keyed, just like we did here, and that's why I showed you how to keyframe the animations by using the right click, because the only way, unfortunately, that at least I'm aware of, is that you can right click on these and set keys. So you can key these, but you have to right click and key on them. And that's probably why I key the way I do, because as you add more advanced properties, that's how you have to key them anyway. Okay, so again, you can key this part though. Since this is common attributes, you can key those with, again, with Shift W, Shift E, Shift R, or the S key. Those will all work for that. But the actual properties down here, they'll have to be manually keyed by right-clicking and going key selected. I'm going to delete that. I'm going to add that later to mine, but moving on. Next, deform here. We got another deform in here somewhere. There we go. Nonlinear. Sine. Okay, so sine is, let me rotate this. This is a lot easier to showcase what this is when we rotate this. A sine wave is a wave. It's just a wave file, a wave length thing. So if I go deform, sine, nonlinear sine, what it is it has an amplitude, which will determine the length of it. Let me rotate this. You can see that it didn't do my thing quite right. So again, you can always rotate the deformer itself. But the amplitude is how far between the valley and the peak the wavelength that sine is. So it's basically a waveform. The wavelength is how many, things. It's 2. If you actually decrease the number, it takes less units, which means more waves, more of these. So the smaller this thing, the more waves you can get. And as you can see, it kind of gets kind of rough up here. This particular one needs a lot of geometry, a lot of subdivisions to make it be clean. So if you're doing this kind of one, you're probably going to have an object with lots and lots of subdivisions. The more subdivisions there are, the cleaner this will be. And I should be able to go back and add more to this. It's working, it's just, you need a lot. There you go, you can see it's a little bit cleaner, but it's too, my thing's too much on this. All right, so the offset allows you just to move it. And again, why would we do that? Remember, these can be animated, so maybe one of the things you're going to do is animate this. Drop off is if you want to not affect the ends, which I almost always use in this case. So I generally turn this up a little bit, which you'll see is kind of more like this. So I personally like that. And then again, what you do is animate the offset. Got to make those, little making sound effects, of course, but fun times. Maybe you do a little machine thing. Maybe it's a little readout. Maybe you're gonna put a little thing in here and just animate this. Put a little bright color on this. Lambert that's just very bright. Put it inside a box, like have the little electricity going. Totally can do that for your machine. Make very interesting things. And again, low bound and high bound effect, where this particular deformer will affect it. In this case, because I rotated it on its side, it's gonna be left and right side. So if I turn this one to 0 or to turn the high bound to 0, it's going to shut off half of it on one side. Yeah, I don't know what I would do this for personally, but again, there's all kinds of things you can do. And of course, again, all these things can be animated as well as the sine wave itself. So we come in here and select the sine handle, move this You can see if you want to do like like the monitors, boom, boom, you just go animate this going across, and that's how you would get something like that. Now, of course, you can come in here and rotate and scale this too. This is probably going to have disastrous results, but let's find out. It looks like you can also reduce it pretty well, and the rotation is going to be very weird. So you can see, whoa, maybe do some weird things, because if you rotate it the wrong way, it's going to definitely get weird. So that's the sine wave. Again, I'm showing you just optional tools that you can potentially use. I would try to use at least two, but get in there. All right, rotate this back. Squash is very easy. That's another one of these straightforward ones. So the next one on this list is again called squash. And what it does is it's a squash and stretch. If you're familiar with that term from animation, it's a squash and stretch. And I'm just decreasing the factor here. I missed. And this is a squash and stretch. Now I might try this one on the bottom one. I might do a bend deformer down here. I don't know. I might try some different things. So squash and stretch. The expand is kind of just a multiplier of the factor. You can also have it affect only certain parts of it, be using the max expand position. You can also smooth it and taper it from either side. So you can smooth it or taper it from one side or the other and get more like a top looking thing. And then of course you can mess with the low bound and high bound. Once again, very repeat, commands here. When you see those, you can affect one side or not the other, or go above. So this one's really straightforward in my opinion, but again, I strongly recommend that you just make an object or several objects and just play with these different settings here to try those things out. I'm going to go and delete this one and move on to the next one, which is twist. Twist doesn't do me much good on my particular cylinder here. Mistake, so I make sure I undid. Deform, nonlinear, twist, there we go. Because this is a perfect cylinder, it's not really going to do anything. But you'll see the geometry change when I switch. But if I change the start angle, it's going to twist. But again, because it's a cylinder, nothing happened. But if I click on the object or go into wireframe, you can see that it is twisting the geometry. So if this wasn't a perfect cylinder, or if this was something more, had a kind of like some actual modeling into it, you would see it twist, which would be great. But otherwise, like I said, this doesn't really, unfortunately, do much in my example here because it's already a perfect cylinder with nothing to do. So again, if you want to go ahead and go through there and add some geometry, let me tone this down, make this maybe 20, and I'm just going to select some random things here, whatever, select some random things, extrude. There we go, and then come back in here and then twist this, deform, nonlinear twist, and then start twisting this. You can see it's obviously awful, but you can twist these. Again, this would be better if these had more divisions too, but I didn't do that. Okay, so give that one a try. That one's fun. The last one on this list works best on either a cylinder with divisions along the cap. So like, for example, this is divisions along the cap, not the height, but the cap. Everything else before was height, but I'm talking about the cap, which is the top of this. So like 50, for example, or whatever, 50, we'll do 50. Or a polygon plane with a whole lot of divisions. So if we do create polygon primitive plane, and we add, I don't know, we'll say 200 divisions on both of these. These are the two kinds of items that work best with this next deformer. So the next deformer is nonlinear wave. So I'll go ahead and add it to this one first. And again, these are settings. Again, envelopes the whole thing. Amplitude is how much of it's going to affect it. It's very familiar with the sine wave. And wavelength is kind of the same as the sine wave. It's how many times you want it to repeat. Right now it's just the one. So if I reduce this number, you can see I'm going back and forth and mess with these properties. It's a lot like a base a bass reverberating thing, or some sort of sound system reverberating, or a drop in the water. Those are the two examples I like to use the most. Offset will once again move the waves. If you can think of this being animated, I'm scrubbing this right now. Drop off, just like before. You can have it affect. I almost always use this myself, so you can tone it down so it doesn't affect the outer edges or reduces it. You can also have it mess up the position, so you drop off position so it doesn't do in the center area or not as much. And you can also even go like a hard cap with a min radius and max radius, so where it will not affect the center at all, like that. And the max would be reduce the back, the outside edge. So this works on planes with lots and lots and lots of divisions. It actually works better on cylinders because they're already the shape of this wave file format. Oops, we did the wrong thing. So come over here. I'll do the exact same thing. Nonlinear wave, and you'll see it work on this as well. Oops, wrong property. Amplitude first, then we'll do wavelength. So you can see I can do a lot less geometry on a cylinder cap because it's already the geometry is already going the correct way for this. Or you can just power your way through it with a plane with lots of divisions if you need to as well. So you can see cylinder caps generally work better for less geometry. So there you go. You can see we do the exact same things here. That's sine. Okay. So you have to make the choice of how you're going to do this. And again, it's probably going to take up a bit of time and require experimentation. Don't be afraid to scrap and try again. This is perhaps going to take the longest for you guys. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, and again, I might make mistakes on this video, and that's fine. What I'm going to do is I'm going to apply the flare to this one. I'm going to go nonlinear flare. And I'm going to go ahead and add some curvature in there. And I don't really need the starter end flare myself. Maybe I'll use it a little bit because I plan on just straight up animating this. I might actually reduce the high bound and low bound. But I plan on animating this going through like this. And I don't like what it does there. So I need to reduce it or make these pipes bigger because I don't want that flare going that much. So let's reduce the curve a little bit more. I probably should have definitely made those things bigger. I can, again, probably reduce the low bound and high bound. This might help reduce this, but let's find out. Low bound. And what this will do is localize it. There we go. So you can see it's still going to mess up when I get here. But what I'm going to do is I think I'm going to animate it from like here to like here, and then I will turn it off completely. So I'll do some tricks here. And I'm not 100% sure if this works. Nope, it doesn't work. I didn't think that would work, but I wanted to try it. So I'll probably just go all right. So I'm seeing a mistake here. Like I said, I'm experimenting. This is too much. What I could do to fix my mistake is I'm going to go ahead and just move this down. And this should be fine. But I'm going to go ahead and come in here and select these edges. I went into wireframe with the 4 key. And I double clicked those edges. And I'm just going to scale these to be much smaller. So when the flare hits them, maybe it'll be fine. So let's find out. There we go. So you see I fixed my mistake. And this is kind of, like I said, a lot of problem solving that you have to kind of do. So I'm kind of figuring out what I want to do here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and animate this. And what I'm going to do is, again, I have a 10-second animation. I think I want it, honestly, to probably go in here more than once. So what I'll do is I'll do from frame 1, I'm going to grab this flare. I'm just going to have it out here. And I'm just going to animate the translate. Translate Y, key selected. And again, because this is the only thing I had selected when I did this, this is the only thing it's going to affect. So I don't have to worry about it being in anything else. And then I'll go down to, I don't know, we'll go down to what I'll do is I think I'm gonna do 4 seconds, then 2-second break, and then 4 seconds again. And that's the part where I said, because this is a very mechanical, you have to kind of think about that. And of course, you can change it later. Like I said, in future lectures, we're going to talk about timing and moving times and getting really refined. But right now, just kind of try to be very abstract with your times for simplicity. 4 seconds would be 96, right? So we're going to go ahead and to 96 and then move this down. I'm going to key that. You can see, again, I moved the time first, then moved the object, in this case the deformer, and then moved it down and keyed it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to wait for about almost 2 seconds. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and key it at the end too, because I'm cheating. I know it's going to be there at the very end too, so I'm skipping ahead. Cheating. I know, cheater. And then I also know that it should be, I'm going to do this wrong on purpose. I'm going to go ahead and copy this. And then I said I'm going to wait 2 seconds, right? So that'd be 120, 144. So this is where it's going to start again. I'm going to paste this. And why is this wrong? So if you rewind this and look at this, it's going to keep go, 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 go. And I'm just scrubbing the timeline. And what it's going to do is it's going to start going back up slowly. Well, actually, relatively fast. And then it's going to go down again. And the reason it's doing this is because, again, all the computer knows is value over time. So what's going to happen is it's going down. But right here, there's nothing telling it to stay down here. So it's going to go back up. And then it's going to go back down again. So what we need is something called a hold frame. And what that is basically a frame of no change here. So I basically need this frame right here to be copied and pasted up to right here. Generally, one frame right before. So I'm going to right click, copy this. Again, in my case, frame 96. And then I'm going to paste it one frame before. So what I'm saying now is there's no value change between here and here, and suddenly one frame, it's going to snap up and you won't see it because it's one frame, 1/24 of a second. You won't even notice it jump up. You won't see it. So that's why it will play. Then there's no change here because this frame and this frame that I just pasted are the exact same. Then the next frame is the one that's back at the top, then it's back at the bottom. So we get the effect that looks something like this. It'll go down, no change, no change, no change, and pop to the top and back down. There you go. So we look at this, you can see my machine is doing its absurd little bloopy thing through there as it goes. And there's one deformer. Now, don't use the same deformer twice because that's boring, but try a different deformer in here. And I'm going to do something on this. Now, I thought about doing a flare, but honestly, I don't know if I want to do that. Oh man, I don't know what I want to do on this bottom one. So let me think about this. First off, there's a couple things here that I kind of skipped over, which is fine. If I manipulate this object scale, for example, this nozzle doesn't stay with it. That's a problem. Now, there's a whole lecture planned on this, but this is basically hierarchies, and what we need is this to inherit the animation or whatever we do to this one, most likely. And I could be wrong, but most likely this is what I want to happen. I want this to do something. I want this to inherit it. We could technically animate this separately. That's what most beginner students would do, and that'd be fine. If you want to go that route and animate like this, getting bigger and smaller, then come back and animate this to stay on the edge, you can do that. But one thing you can do, that might be a nice try, is you can make the nozzle what we call a child of the other object. So for example, what that is, all that means is if I were to middle mouse drag and drop this onto, in my case, the bottom tube here, middle mouse drag and drop, you see the encapsulated line right there? So it's encasing it, let go. This is now a child of this one here. So if we turn that one off, you can see that now when I scale this one here, I scale this one, it affects that one as well. So that might be worth, exploring. So you can now come in here and select this, and you can select it by clicking on this and then grabbing that one by itself, or you can do this beforehand. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm just trying to think of what deformer I want to use. I'm going to go ahead and try squash first. I want to see what it does, how it looks, if I like it. And it's not inheriting it, unfortunately. Made a mistake. I think I'm going to go ahead and keep that. Maybe I'll just go ahead and pull this out right now. So I'm doing that. Figuring out what I want to do for my deformer first, which is probably the better approach. What I think I'm going to do is I'm just going to adjust my squash. I'm only going to have it affect the one side. Let me figure out which side it is. Looks like it's going to be the high bound. Again, I'm kind of yeah, it's the high bound. So I don't want it to affect the still want it to affect the low bound. And again, I'm not 100% sure. I'm just kind of playing. This is, believe it or not, the Sine animation is pretty much done. Especially when you're doing something you've never done before. And this is the first time I've actually presented this particular. I've tried to do this. Okay, that's exactly what I want. But I definitely want this to be positioned higher. What was it? Factor. Okay, moving that up. I don't like the way that looks at all. So like I said, this is what try different things. 0.5. I definitely don't want to do the same thing I did before. So you know what? It's too close. I might just do the bend. Just let me see what that looks like. So again, I'm kind of working through it. Seeing what I want to do. Curvature. This one should be really straightforward. So you can see this is bending, not bending the correct way that I want at least. So I'm going to rotate this 90 degrees. I don't want it to affect the high bound. I just want it to affect the low bound. And then I'm going to move this up. And then the curvature. Yeah, maybe something like that. All right, let's see if I can get this to work now with the thing on the end here, which I don't know if this is going to work without using some other more advanced features, but let's give this a shot. We might have had to do the bend with this at the same time. Oops, wrong thing. I mean, there's ways around it. Okay, yeah, we're not going to do that. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and delete the bend deformer. Like I said, I'll go ahead and merge, but combine these two, which again, even though these are separate objects, Maya will now see them as one. There's other ways of doing this. That's even more complicated, I think, for our first lecture. If I type history, so again, I combined these, I delete the history, and I'm going to drag and drop it back in my group. Hopefully you don't have to do things like that as much as I did, but sometimes it will happen, unfortunately. Bend. Let's repeat this stuff. What was it? Curvature. And I rotated it 90 degrees. And then I didn't want the high bound. And then we increase the low bound. And then after that, we can animate the curvature. We're going to move this line up some more. There we go. So we can just mess with the curvature. So maybe what I'll do is I'll just kind of start this out at 0. And what I'm thinking about doing is animating the curvature at 0. And then I'm going to repeat the same thing at the last frame. And then maybe at 60, I'm also going to repeat 0. Because what I want to do is I only want to do it for a little bit. Maybe 160, sure. And then so these are all zeros. Technically, I didn't need the one in the beginning and the end, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of come in here and just a little bit of curvature. And you know what? For this last thing, I'm going to go ahead and talk about auto keyframe here. I generally don't like auto keyframing until you get some experience. But once you have some experience, this little checkbox down here, this little um, is it this one? I never remember the icons. Never remember the icons. I think it's this one. Yep, it's little circles here. Let's check test. Yep, that's the one. That's auto keyframe. The one on the right of it was animation settings. I apologize, but I can come in here and what this does will automatically, anytime you make changes to the thing with time difference, it will automatically set keys for you. So if you change it, it will change it. And again, I don't generally use this one as much because I generally try to keep my stuff pretty clean. But you know, this is a great example of using auto keyframes. And I'm going to go ahead and make sure I check this off because nothing's worse than accidentally setting keyframes when you don't intend to. So let's hit play, see what that looks like. You can see it's kind of going in there. Maybe I'd have something gump out. I don't know. If you wanted to, you could come in here and, you know, this is beyond this particular lecture, but if you wanted to, you could come in here and animate this. Problem with this, there's two problems with this. If I try to animate this, is one, it's rotating from here, which it shouldn't. It should be rotating from up there. So we've already talked about that. The second problem is the deformers are outside the group. These just need to be moved inside to the machine, that's all. So they just need to be inside the group. So I just middle mouse dragged and dropped them into the group. And like I said, the other problem was this pivot point needs to be, it makes more sense for it to be up here. So when you rotate this, it rotates from, like, I don't know, it's attached to the ceiling. So we could animate this if we wanted to as well. But I'm not going to do that. But you could do that. So you can see we have our machine animated here. Now, this is pretty good progress. There's a lot that we covered, in this lecture, obviously. But this is, you know, this is coming along really well. We're pretty much near done. In fact, this is as far as I think I'm going to take this machine. But let's talk about the very, very last steps. So you have two options when you want to do an animate. Well, there's more than two, but the two main options that I recommend right now are, one, you can do a play blast. And the other one is, because Maya's rendering has gotten better, you can render it as a movie or an AVI file. It used to be totally garbage, but honestly, it's way better now. So I don't think it's a bad idea to do that as well. Play blast are quicker and easier. What that is a play blast will render everything on your screen. So what it looks like here, at the 7 key, it will look like this. It will, if you have your lights turned on, again, if you hit show here, show lights, it will render with the lights icons in there. It renders everything that you see here exactly how you see it here. So if that bothers you, if you have something selected, it'll render it with it selected. What play blasts are designed to do is they're designed to be something that you can show someone very quickly, and you know, for your team, and that way they can see how it is animated. So I'm going to go ahead and do a play blast first, just to show you how to do that one, and then I'm going to go ahead and render out a movie or an AVI. I didn't really talk about project settings in this one, so that's something I really should talk about. But unfortunately, I'm just going to render it out, and then this should save to a default spot in your scene. If not, you know, I can show you where that is. So play blast is pretty simple. Display. Sorry, not display. See, I've forgotten where it is. Windows, Play Blast, option box, right here. Windows Play Blast option box. And what it does, it's honestly pretty straightforward. It renders out the view. Let me reset these settings. You can reset any window in Maya by clicking on the edit right here, reset the settings. I'm just going to reset it because I'm not 100% sure what the default settings are anymore. Okay. So it looks like, I think you can turn off ornaments, which is the icon shapes. These things, that's an ornament. I'm going to turn those off. You can render out the view. Generally, I leave all the default settings alone. Scale, so it's going to render out as an AVI. If you're on a Mac, it's going to render out as a movie. Encoding, I'm not very good with the coding, but if you know encoders, you can save yourself memory there. Quality 70%. It's going to render roughly whatever half your screen resolution is. So that's what it is. And then I like to save it as a file. Again, if you render this out, it just renders temporarily, but if you render out save a file, you can call it whatever you want. You can hit browse, and you can save it wherever you want. I'm going to call this absurd machine right here. And I'm going to go ahead and hit, I'll do underscore play blast to this as well. And I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And then hit play blast, and it just literally renders out what you have here. So it's going to render out half the screen. It's rendering this out. And when it gets done, you can see it rendered that out. So that's cool. This is definitely the easier one to do. It doesn't really require anything. It's just the quality is not that great. Now, the second way you can do this is just doing a straight up render. Now, if you do this particular method, I recommend you turn on one setting before you get started here, and that's called the camera resolution gate. Because if you render with using your software, your graphics card, and render out renders, your resolution of your screen isn't going to match the rendering of your settings that you initially changed here, and if you changed them in your render settings. And again, the render settings are found under this little clapboard with the gear. So right now it's saying it's going to render at HD 1080, which is a 1920 by 1080 pixels. That is not the same resolution as what I'm viewing currently here. This is more square in here. So you want to turn on your resolution gate so you can see exactly what's going to render. Now that's found under View, Camera Settings, Resolution Gate. And what this will do is give you a crop finder of exactly what is going to render in your scene. So you can position your camera and have absolute confidence where this is going to render. If you want to turn this off, or you can go and zoom in more if you want. If you want to crop into this. So maybe I want to crop into this. If you want to turn this off, it goes in the exact same area as you did before. Go to Camera Settings, Resolution Gate. Instead of Resolution Gate, you switch it back to No Gate. I'm going to go ahead and leave Resolution Gate on though, but again, No Gate, turn it off. Camera Settings, Resolution Gate to turn it on. So this is exactly what's going to render right here. Now, if you go into your render settings, and you do have to do this, and I apologize because it's a lot of information, especially in this entire lecture. But if you go into your render settings, there is a way to save the image format as an AVI. Now, when we get later in the semester, we're going to talk about what's called multi-frame rendering. And I would never even have talked about this, a few years ago. But again, they've gotten a lot better at their AVI and their movie renders. But if you just switch this to AVI, if you want, you can turn on the compression. I probably shouldn't even clicked on that, and I just crashed my computer. That's unfortunate. Hopefully you guys save your stuff. Let's see what happens here. Always save before you hit render. Let's find out what happens. Hopefully it auto-saved. Otherwise, that's going to be the end of this particular lecture. So yeah, you can. I actually usually don't even bother to compress because you can always compress later with something else. So let us see if it hopefully auto-saved, and it did. Thank you. I think it'll be this one. Come on, computer. Still going here. So we'll see what happens. I clicked on it, but it's a little slow. There we go. Oh, thankfully it saved everything. Learn from that scare there. Make sure you save it out. Control S. Actually, Control Shift S because it's saving as an auto file now. I need to save to my desktop. Insert machine. Save. Overwrite. Probably should have stood save as just in case it was corrupted. You never know. But anyway, back to this again. Try this again. Don't click on compression. You want to make sure if you do AVI, if you do this method, make sure you change the start and end frame to match whatever your animation is. That's really the only other thing you need to do other than switch this to AVI movie. Is make sure that you start and end frame match whatever you currently have. Mine's to 240. And again, make sure it's in production. And we'll see what this does. Because like I said, I haven't done this in a while. But again, you need to make this AVI, start an in-frame, match whatever you were doing. You probably shouldn't have any other cameras in your scene. We haven't talked about that yet. You had size that we talked about earlier. Make sure it's on production quality in Maya software. Again, if you don't do all these things and just do a play blast, that's absolutely fine. I'm going to go ahead and close this now. Remember, all these settings safe. And then what you're going to do, if you want to render out an actual video, you go to the rendering menu set, top left, render, batch render, and it'll start rendering. Now, the problem with the rendering here is it's not really a problem, but it's going to save it to the default directory unless you've set a project up on your computer. Right now, it's getting ready to say it's during the bottom. It's going to say rendering with Maya software. I'm not sure how long this will take. Maybe we'll have to do movie magic to get this to quite go here, but it should be pretty fast. Probably shouldn't have did HD 1080 to be completely honest, but let it go, and then we'll come back and we'll definitely edit this out, and we'll definitely see how long it takes to render here. And there it goes. It's rendering 1 frame, 2 frames. It's going relatively fast. I don't know how long this is going to take. So while this rendering technically you can still work in Maya, I don't recommend it. I'd recommend just letting the computer do its thing as it goes. And we'll go ahead and cut away. And like I said, I'll come back to this as soon as it's complete. All right. So welcome back. Like I said, we did some movie magic to finish out this render here. Normally I was speaking about how the render was better, and it is. I don't think the problem that I experienced with the compression under the rendering settings will affect you. Obviously, as you saw, save before you click on that compression button. But I have done it on different computers, but it does seem to be a reoccurring thing on mine. It might be a driver setting that I have to look into. But you can try compression because if you render this out, as you saw, it took so long. Maybe if I do a movie file, I'm not going to do it. There we go. We have actually quality settings built in. We don't have to worry about compression. If you have a QuickTime Movie installed in your machine, you'll have this image format automatically. Or if you're on a Mac, you can try a movie file as well. Again, I have used other computers other than the one I'm currently recording this on, where I have done AVI compression and it didn't crash. So I don't know what the reason is for that in my case. I'm willing to blame my computer over Maya in this particular case. If you do not do the compression, you can still do this. You can totally render what I did without the compression. As you saw, it took a long time to render. And the reason it took a long time to render is because it's going to be a big file. If you have a way, and again, if you do not know how to compress something after the fact, then maybe this isn't the technique for you at this time. I'll eventually show how to do that, but I won't show it obviously in this lecture. It's already too long as it is. But maybe you might want to do the play blast that I originally shown. But if you did save it out as a full-on movie or an AVI file, okay, it's going to go by default into your default Maya directory, which is at least for a PC, it would be under Documents, Maya, and then it will be under sometimes a folder. Um, um, it's either going to be under the projects folder or one of these folders here, and you got to find that particular project. So projects default, and it always saves to the images folder. And again, if you didn't change the location, which we didn't do, this is where it's going to go. And as you can see, that this render is much higher quality than the Play Blast. It's way higher quality. And again, this is not even the best renderer in Maya. This is not even like, this is the point and click camera, but it's way better than a Play Blast. But the problem is, if your compression isn't working like mine was, and you don't compress it, it's going to be too large. So you can see this cool little um, um, object, absurd machine doing its thing, going along and having, doing whatever it does. I have no idea what it does. But that's the absurd machine. And again, I think we covered a lot of stuff in this first little exercise here on the observed machine. So there's a lot to really get into. Later on, we'll talk about, again, multi-frame animation, which is the way I recommend going anyway, for finalized stuff. And then, if it's intermediate, you can do Play Blast to really see the timing of your animations. Again, those are not meant to be finalized things, but they're really good for short, quick views of your objects there. So hopefully you enjoyed that. Um, Feel free to drop questions in the comments, or if you need to, I can help you any way I can. Give that a shot. Try different things out, and hopefully you guys enjoyed making machines like this. And I'll see you all next time. Take care.